Come on, Rockfin. I'm always waiting on you. There you go. And Rumble, where are you? Always waiting on you too. All right, let's go. Let's do the damn thing.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrinasalvati.
Doobie-doobie-doo. Welcome back, guys. Happy Sunday. I hope you've had a great weekend so far. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. We have some interesting stories today, and we'll have more interesting ones on Tuesday. There's so much news that's happening right now. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with everything, but we are going to go ahead and jump right in because I do have a hard stop on Sunday. So I want to go ahead and shout out everyone who is a Sabby patron. Doobie-doobie-doo. Thank you, guys, Sabby patrons, so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. Ultimate, there's Sabinators. I don't know why that's there. I don't know why that thing's there. Anywho, Sabsters. There's also Sabbies. And of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much for your support. Okay. Quick update. I do have, just to give you an idea what's coming up for the show for the rest of the year. Can't believe we're almost done with 2023. It's wild when you think about it. I do have a couple of interviews that are coming up as well. I think you might be surprised about some of them. So stay tuned for that. There's a couple of things that I do want to get done before the end of the year, before we hop into 2024. So stay tuned for that. And then also, I do want to remind you guys, the RBN Boston chapter, we did just have our food and clothing drive. Check out that video if you haven't seen it. It's on my channel. It's on the homepage under On the Ground coverage. That was a great event. We will be doing more events in 2024, but that was the last event for 2023 as we are heading into the Christmas break. So a lot of people end up traveling. I live in a place that's more so a transplant zone, I like to call it. So a lot of people that live here are not from here. So it's kind of hard to do activities during the month of December because people are traveling back and forth. There's also a lot of college students here too. So just keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and bring up that thumbnail, guys, because interesting things to discuss today. I think you might be surprised, at least by one of these stories. What are we discussing tonight? Tonight, we are discussing, believe it or not, Matt Taibbi and also Michael Shellenberger have testified again in front of Congress in reference to free speech. They're targeting social media. We're going to get into that. We're also going to discuss Chuck Schumer pushes the squad. And you'll notice there's a picture there of Rashida Tlaib right behind him. Chuck Schumer has made a statement that has made its way to legislation. We're going to get into that piece of legislation and where the squad stood in reference to that. We're also going to discuss Florida, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who live in the Sunshine State. They have decided to make a decision in reference to the 2024 presidential election. So Florida shocks Democrat candidates Marianne Williamson, Dean Phillips, and Cenk. We're going to get into that discussion. And we're also going to discuss, I'm pretty sure most of you have heard by now, George Santos has finally been expelled from Congress. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this guy, oh my God, he has been quite a doozy, huh? We've been wondering when this was going to happen. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to get started with this story about George Santos. So for those who are not aware, George Santos, he's a representative in Congress. He represents, I believe it's that Staten Island version of New York. So he is a Republican. You know, the moment that George Santos actually took his seat, there have been a lot of accusations against George Santos. One of them being that he lied about his resume. So a couple things that he did. He said that he worked for Goldman Sachs. Apparently that was not true. I don't know why he picked a company as big as Goldman Sachs to choose to say he lied. He worked at it. It just didn't make any sense. He also said that he attended NYU, which also was not true. So back and forth along the way, there's been this question, who is George Santos? This guy says he's everything. He also claimed that he was Jewish at one point. Come to find out that that's not true. But the reason why George Santos has been expelled from Congress more so has to do with campaign finance reform. So apparently he has violated some laws in reference to that. And the House finally did vote in agreement to expel George Santos. I want to go ahead and get started with this clip here from CNN. Let's go ahead and get into it.
We are going to go now to the floor and listen to what's happening. It looks as though they're going to begin this vote. Let's listen in.
And I'll pause it here. I just want you to see the numbers as they're coming in, right? So we have yay, nay, present. Okay, and then this is total. Let's see.
It's going to be 5 minutes. They can hold it open for longer, but as Monty suggested, it's not likely to go much longer than that. But you can see how quickly people are actually voting.
And just watch the bottom number on the left under yay. Now, I guess we don't know if there are 435 members voting today. At least I don't. If there are, that number needs to be 290 to expel George Santos.
That's right, because there's 2/3 supermajority needed in this particular action. I want to get to you, David Chalian.
Before she gets to David, remember 290 people have to vote yes to expel him. And what's interesting about this vote, if you pay attention here, look at Republican and look at Democrat, notice that even Republicans are voting to expel George Santos. Right now it says 44, 48 have said nay. But I think that's a very telling moment here that even some of the Republicans are voting to remove George Santos.
Looking at all this and hearing how this really, what might be considered a major shift from thinking he was going to get pushed out and expelled to now seeing this shift, what does that tell you about leadership? Even though they aren't whipping the votes, they are making their statement very clear by saying they are not voting to expel.
Right. We heard Speaker Johnson earlier in the week say this should be a vote that is a matter of conscience. I would imagine all votes for members of Congress should be a vote of matter of conscience. But he said that he was uncomfortable with it. And then today, obviously, the dramatic development of him saying that he is indeed going to vote against this resolution to expel Santos. And as you're discussing, I think both things can be true, right? It could be both the process precedent and the politics that are dictating motivations here. I do think it's worth noting, guys, if indeed Santos survives this, and we'll see, you're up to 200 yay votes now as you're looking for that 2/3 majority. And as John noted, if all 435 members are present and voting, that'll be 290 to get him expelled. But I would just say, if indeed he survives this, Democrats would indeed get the best outcome here in the sense that they get to vote to expel him and yet keep him as a poster boy to run against the Republican Party overall over the next many months.
And again,
and so you'll see here continuing again, these numbers continue to increase. Now, obviously, right now, there are more Republicans that voted nay. but still the number of yays are also increasing. So George Santos, but I want to be very clear here too. I don't want people to assume that just because George Santos was expelled, that his career is over, that it's over for him, because there's something else I'm going to show you after this clip. I'm going to show you how George Santos is still going to be able to benefit from his time in Congress, even though he is expelled. Believe it or not, he will still benefit.
The other number, I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just keep an eye on what is happening. What you're seeing is the Republican number of who is voting in favor of expelling, the yays, is at 76 right now. Now it's at 77. If all members are voting in the chamber and voting, they have now, and all Democrats are voting to expel him. They have potentially passed the threshold of expelling him. However, an important note, they can change their votes. Right. So we do not call this, do not, no one declares anything until the gavel lands. They still have 2 minutes plus left on here. Let's leave this up, guys, and bring up Manu Raju.
Yeah, just again, this number right here, 85, is absolutely enough to boot him if they don't change those votes right now.
For context, let's talk about the last vote and how what he survived. The last vote to expel, it was 179 in favor. That included 24.
Yeah, so I do want to mention, just in case people forgot, this isn't the first time they voted to expel George Santos. They did so before. He survived that for some reason. This time around, he did not. And it could be he survived it the first time because maybe some of the politicians felt like there wasn't enough damning evidence. I don't know how they would see there wasn't, but enough damning evidence to expel him at that point in time. But more information has been released since that last vote. So just one thing to keep in mind. I'm going to fast forward here just a little bit so we can go to him.
Was 77. So unless something dramatically changes, this will be a historic and unprecedented vote where George Santos will be the first member ever to be expelled who has not been convicted of a crime, did not participate as the Confederate in the Civil War. But these allegations appearing to be so damning that members said that it is enough. It is time to kick him out of the chamber. I just talked to one of them, Carlos Jimenez of Florida. He said that, I asked him about the precedent. Is he concerned about setting the precedent? He said, well, if the precedent shouldn't be lying and stealing from your donors, that should be enough to get you out of Congress. And apparently that's how a lot of the Republicans felt here. 89 Republicans right now are there. Was 90 Republicans. There's still 48 people who have not voted yet. They need to get that magic number of 290 if all members are present and voting, and we'll see ultimately if they can get there. But at the moment, he is on his way out of Congress, which would set up a special election. And a seat that Democrats could pick up, it could make Mike Johnson's job even harder to advance his agenda because
they just got to 290.
One member.
And they just hit 290. One thing I want to add about taking money from donors, I don't think that George Santos is the first politician to do that. I think he just happened to get caught, right? So he was caught. He wasn't as fortunate as some of the others who may have done the same thing. So I don't want people to think that this has never happened before, that there aren't other candidates that have done this as well. I think he just happened to get caught. So I'm going to go forward a little bit here after they had just reached 290. So you'll see here, I want you to see the number. Now at this point, it says 101 Republicans voted yay. Of course, 205 Democrats voted yay. There was one Democrat that voted nay. I don't know why anyone would vote present, but one voted present at that point in time. But very interesting.
Evenly split here. 102 Republicans now voting to expel George Santos. That is a very big number. That was far more than what was actually needed in order to expel George Santos. Now, they haven't brought down the gavel yet, so it's not final. Nothing's final till it's final around here. But it certainly looks like George Santos is on track to become just the 6th member ever expelled and bringing an end to his very brief congressional career that was filled with drama, scandals, and lies. Now, in terms of what happens next year, I mean, this is going to be treated like a vacancy. So the clerk will assume control of his office, will make decisions on behalf of his office. George Santos, for his part, said that he will go home and he will pack up his office and head back to New York tomorrow, and that he will go sort of quietly into the night. And then at some point, the governor of New York is going to have to call a special election in the next 10 days. That would set up a special election sometime in the next 70 to 80 days from now. It's going to be a tough race because this is a Biden seat. It's a blue district. This is something that Democrats have a very strong chance at flipping. And in the short term, it's going to narrow the already
Melanie, hang
thin
on for a second.
majority.
We want to get to Manu Raju, who's got someone with him. Manu.
So I want to pause here for a second before we get to the coverage outside of Congress. One of the things for those of you that live in that district, yes, there is a special election that will be coming your way because they do have to fill that seat. So pay attention and stay tuned for that. That will be happening. Here we go here right outside Capitol.
George Santos there. George Santos coming down the stairs there of the Capitol. Now you hear Manu trying to get to him, and as soon as he gets to him, it looks like he isn't saying anything to anyone. He has been talking a heck of a lot before this vote, but now you see this vote, 310. The threshold was 290 to kick him out. We are waiting to see if he says anything there. Let's listen in. Nope, jumped in the car, closed the door,
and took off.
Santos, any comment? Mr. Santos, any comment?
Wait, let's go to the House floor, guys. He just gavelled. The speaker's gaveling. Go to the House floor.
Done. Just like that, George was gone.
Speaker Johnson is in the chair, which is quite significant. Let's stand by and see what he's about to say. I just saw him drop the gavel.
So that's 311 yays.
Here we go.
Again, the people who voted present are hilarious to me.
On this vote, the yeas are 311, the nays are 114, with 2 recorded as present. 2/3 voting in the affirmative, the resolution is adopted, and a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
There you go. So that is it for George Santos. He is gone. However, he is not the only member to be expelled. So I do want to go ahead and share that as well. Oh, I thought I had that. 1 second. Oh, maybe I didn't. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me pull that up. Yeah, he's not the only one that's been expelled. I did see something from MSNBC. I want to go ahead and pull that up as well, because I do want you to see who the other people were that were expelled as well. Let's see. So let me pull this up. Here it is. Okay. So he actually becomes the 6th member to be expelled. So let's go ahead and bring this up. Some of these go really, really far back, but you'll see. You may recognize some of these people. I did not. I did not. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen here. So again, George Santos expelled from Congress. He is the 6th member of the House to be expelled. Let's take a look at the history here.
With that, Santos is now a former member of Congress. He is the 6th member of the House to be expelled in all of American history. Here are the other 5. You could add Santos to this list and just think about the gravity of what it took to expel these members in the past. These 3, you see in the top row here, all 1861. That was the start of the Civil War. Each one of them took up arms.
So let's go back. I'm going to pause here so you can just see the names. We have John B. Clark, 1861. John Reed, 1861. Henry, oh, he's standing in front of Henry. We'll get back to Henry. Michael Myers, and no, not Michael Myers from Halloween, but Michael Myers and James Traficant. So let's continue.
The gravity of what it took to expel these members in the past. These 3, you see in the top row here, all 1861. That was the start of the Civil War. Each one of them took up arms for the Confederacy. They were expelled from the House. Michael Myers from Pennsylvania in 1980. He had been snared in the FBI sting operation known as Abscam, accepted a $50,000 bribe, refused to resign his seat. He was expelled. And then in 2002, James Traficant from Ohio, colorful member of Congress. He had been convicted of multiple federal corruption charges. in the spring of 02, in the summer of 02. The House voted 420-1 to expel him. So those are the 5 who this has happened to before. Santos becomes the 6th. There are a few others in history who have faced expulsion votes but haven't actually been expelled. Santos was hoping to join this company today.
Pause here because I do know one of these guys. So these were other expulsion attempts. Preston Brooks, 1856. Lavelle Rousseau, 1866. And this guy right here, Barney Frank, 1990, actually failed. Barney Frank was from Massachusetts. So that's why I remember Barney Frank being one of those attempts as well. So this is just, it's wild, man, when you look at it.
But it is this list instead that he joins. 6 in American history. You just saw the 6th moments ago.
Okay, but here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Here's something that you may not be aware of. Even though George Santos has been expelled from Congress, it appears he will still be able to receive benefits and perks, even though he is no longer in the House. So this is the part I really wanted to tell you about. George Santos may get to enjoy all sorts of exclusive lawmaker-only perks, including the ability to walk onto the House floor, even though he's been expelled from Congress. This is the piece I think a lot of people may not be aware of. You can still see George Santos' face in the future if he wants it to be. It says Representative George Santos of New York was expelled from the House on Friday. The scandal-plagued Republican apparently expected that to happen, declaring during a profanity-laden tirade against his colleagues that he would wear his expulsion like a badge of honor. He was expelled on Friday by a 311-114 vote, with 2 lawmakers voting present. 112 House Republicans and 2 Democrats voted against expelling him. But as it turns out, that is not the end of the story. Here we go. He will become a former member of Congress, says Daniel Schumer, the director of governments at the Pop Vox Foundation. Former members of Congress have a lot of privileges. Wait for it, folks. Those privileges, which would also apply if he resigned, typically include the ability to walk onto the House floor, to use lawmaker-only facilities, and even purchase and perhaps auction off their own office furniture. In other words, George Santos may be able to keep LARPing as a member of Congress, even though he's been expelled. Now, pause here for a second. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that even if you're expelled from Congress, you still get to maintain some of those privileges? Think about it. This guy's obviously corrupt. I don't think he's the only politician in the House that's corrupt, but his corruption was actually caught, right? So he's actually being held accountable, but he's still allowed to walk onto the House floor whenever he feels like it. Just like, what's up, guys? I'm back. I am back. But Santos could be denied some of these perks, and at least one group says it's already prepared to do so. It goes on to say he could keep hanging out on the House floor. It is not uncommon to see former members in the chamber when the House is in session. Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma, a member of the House until last year, was spotted hanging out on the floor during the most recent speakership fight. According to House rules, any former lawmaker can walk onto the floor unless they are a lobbyist or a foreign agent, have a direct personal or financial interest in the bill being considered, or have been convicted of a crime in relation to the individual's election or service to the House. That last one is fairly relevant here. Santos is set to go to trial next September for a bevy of charges related to his campaign. But if Santos' former colleagues want to keep him from loitering around until a possible criminal conviction forbids him from doing so, they could take action on their own. They could pass a resolution to exclude him from the House. So that's one thing they can do. And then there's this piece here. He can keep using lawmakers only gym and dining facilities. So this is one of the privileges that members of Congress get. They have certain gym privileges and dining facilities. I personally believe that gyms should be free to the public. Not everybody can afford a gym membership. So I always wish there was something like that in place, someone who was willing to open a free gym and just have it be publicly funded. But yeah, he gets to maintain that. Under House rules and by custom, former lawmakers, as long as they're not registered lobbyists, have typically been allowed access to the House gym as long as they pay a fee. They can also use parking garages in the Capitol complex and have access to seating in the House restaurant facilities and members' dining room. That would be interesting. Who'd you have lunch with today? George. He could buy his own desk for $1,000 and probably auction it off for a handsome profit. According to a 2008 Congressional Research Service report, outgoing lawmakers are allowed to purchase their own office furniture. That report says lawmakers can buy their desks for $1,000 and their chairs for $500. They can also purchase their district office furniture. And this is something that if he wanted to, he could sell this on Craigslist, eBay. Considering he's a controversial figure, somebody out there would actually buy it, believe it or not. They'll be able to say, I have George Santos' desk, man. If you're George Santos and have been accused of bilking campaign donors to buy Botox and OnlyFans, you've got to be thinking of the potential for one last grift. And let's face it, he could make a decent chunk of change by auctioning off his desk. It goes on to say here, exclusive group for former lawmakers wants nothing to do with Santos. Typically, former members of Congress are invited to join the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress, an organization chartered by Congress in 1983 that boasts more than 800 members. The group markets itself as the premier vehicle to keep former lawmakers engaged in government and connected to each other after their federal public service has ended, including via fancy receptions and travel and speaking opportunities. See, again, these are just some of the benefits that congressional members receive. But in a statement to Business Insider on Monday, the group made clear that it wanted nothing to do with Santos. We welcome all members who have completed their service in the House or Senate to join our organization, provided they are in good standing. Given the litany of substantiated allegations in the bipartisan House Ethics Committee report, Congressman Santos would not fall into that category. Now, this piece right here is important. He won't receive any pension benefits. Remember, if I remember correctly, I believe you have to serve for 5 years before you get the pension. So he didn't make it that long. Despite all these other perks, Santos won't receive a pension. It goes on to say Congress only receive pension benefits if they've served in the House for 5 years or more. Santos hasn't been in office for 11 months. So just something to add to that story there that you may not have been aware of, that there are some privileges and benefits that George Santos will actually be able to retain. But other than that, George is gone. Desert Mantis says Santos is almost as good a liar as Joe Biden. Rohan said Bernie Sanders and the squad lied to their donors as well. This is true. Deneen says he's a con man, so Congress is the perfect place for him. And Jade says kicked out for lying. We should have no one left. I hear you. I hear you, Jade. All right, let's get into our next story. We are doing good on time. If you have not heard, Chuck Schumer has been very vocal about making sure that there is no room for anti-Semitism in the United States. Now, he actually recently gave a speech about this. As you all know, of course, Chuck Schumer is Jewish himself. And this actually led to legislation that the House voted on, and it did pass. They are now saying that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. Now, this is very, very important for people to understand, because Zionism and Judaism is not the same thing. And what is troubling about this piece of legislation is that now people are going to be able to, or at least our government is going to be able to basically say the two are the same. What does that mean in reference to protest, right? For those who are protesting in favor of the Palestinian people, for them to have some type of self-determination, to stop the occupation and oppression, what would that mean in reference to protest? So we are now walking on dangerous lines here. I want to get into this clip here. Chuck Schumer says the rise of anti-Semitism is a 5-alarm fire that must be extinguished. On my major address on the Senate floor this week on the dangerous and disturbing rise of anti-Semitism in America. We're going to get into this clip, but one thing I want to say really quickly before we dive in. What's really interesting to me is how quickly our government can move for some groups, but not for others. And I'll show you a little bit more of this later on in this segment. It's interesting to me that when it came to passing the anti-Asian hate crime bill, they were able to move very quickly with that under the Biden administration. Now with this bill, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism bill, they were able to move very quickly to pass this bill. But if you pay very close attention, when it comes to African Americans in this country, they still have not passed the anti-lynching bill. Still, till this day. And this is something more voters are starting to see. And coming 2024, people are calling it out on social media. This is something that the Democratic Party really needs to be concerned about. The fact that more African Americans are becoming upset with the Democratic Party for their lack of, I don't want to say support, but their lack of, I don't want to phrase this. They're just not delivering, right? So they have a tendency to pander to African American voters, but they don't actually deliver to the African American community once they are elected and in office. And more Black voters are starting to call this out. In fact, I saw something recently that said, and people need to pay attention to this, more Black voters are leaving the Democratic Party and going over to the Republican Party. Donald Trump's support from African Americans has increased under Joe Biden's administration compared to how it was under his own administration. So these are things people need to pay close attention to. We'll get into this discussion here about the speech from Chuck Schumer.
We have seen an alarming rise of anti-Semitism around the world, particularly here in the U.S. Jew hate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in the U.S., just addressed this crisis in a powerful speech on the Senate floor.
Today, I come to the floor to speak on a subject of great importance, the rise of anti-Semitism in America. I feel compelled to speak because I'm the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in America. To us, the Jewish people, the rise of anti-Semitism is a crisis, a 5-alarm fire that must be extinguished. I implore every person, every community, every institution to stand with Jewish Americans, not to ignore it, not to shrug your shoulders, to denounce it, anti-Semitism in all its forms.
In a moment.
Pause here for just a second, because I want to make a distinction, then we'll continue on. For people who are criticizing Netanyahu's administration and his government, for people who are criticizing the state of Israel's attacks on Gaza, particularly the children, right? These people are not criticizing Jewish people. They are criticizing the government, the state of Israel, particularly under Netanyahu's administration. So, for example, I had criticisms of Barack Obama's presidency. I'm sure some of you may have as well. But my criticism of Barack Obama's presidency was not criticism of Black people and the Black community. So I just want to make that distinction. I don't think there should be hate anywhere. I don't think we should hate anyone. And I think everyone should be embraced. But What has seemed to become more of a problem and an issue is the fact that now it seems like even criticizing Netanyahu's administration, even criticizing the occupation and apartheid that is happening to the Palestinian people, there are now people, most of them tend to be Zionists that are doing this, that are now saying that that in itself is anti-Semitic. And I don't think that that's fair. Another point that I want to address, and I think we need to be very clear about this, I want everyone to understand, if you actually look at the definition of Semite, Arabic people are Semites. The Palestinians are Semites. So when people tell you that supporting Palestinian cause is anti-Semitic, you make sure you pull up the definition of Semite so that they understand that Palestinians are also Semites as well. Let's continue.
Both emotional and chilling. The highest-ranking Jewish lawmaker in the U.S. is calling the rise in anti-Semitism in the U.S. virulent and a five-alarm fire.
Senator Chuck Schumer gave voice to a growing fear among Jews in this country that they are effectively alone, that terror against them doesn't matter, or even worse, doesn't exist.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the first Jewish leader of either chamber of Congress and the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in American history, denouncing the surge in anti-Semitism today.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calls rising anti-Semitism in the U.S. a five-alarm fire that must be extinguished.
Chuck Schumer highlighting the alarm felt by Jewish Americans as anti-Semitism spikes in the wake of the October 7th attack on Israelis and the war that's followed.
Senator Schumer, I'm thankful that he did that speech. That is the conversation that went on at every Jewish dinner table over Thanksgiving in America.
Chuck Schumer trying to speak to the nuances of this while also calling out something that we have seen over and over in world history, which is an incredibly durable, virulent, violent, and murderous anti-Semitism, long before nation states, let alone this one, existed.
Senator Schumer really hit the nail on the head.
I don't normally support Chuck Schumer's policies, but what he said yesterday, in my opinion, was dead right.
So something I want to point out there, okay? I have no problem with someone addressing anti-Semitism that we have in this country. I have no problem with that. These things are an issue. We do still have a lot of hate in this country. But I do want to talk about the hypocrisy. Notice all those people that were applauding Chuck Schumer for his speech about anti-Semitism. But notice how people responded to Rashida Tlaib when she spoke out in support of the Palestinian people and about Islamophobia in this country. She was damned and she was censured. Make no mistake, this has everything to do with our politicians' relationship and their loyalty to organizations like AIPAC and their loyalty to the state of Israel. Because it has gotten to the point where their loyalty to the state of Israel, and thank God for all the protests, it has gotten to the point where they have basically given people like Netanyahu a pass to do whatever he wants to do. And at some point, you have to step up and say, this is wrong. What is happening to the Palestinian people is wrong. The UN has done this. Human rights organizations have done this. The reason why most of our politicians are not willing to do it is because they are bought and paid for by organizations like AIPAC. So again, this goes back to an underlying theme, which I've said multiple times before. We need to remove lobbyists from electoral politics. We should not have lobbyists. We should not have corporate money in electoral politics. If we had public financing of elections, we wouldn't have this issue. And yes, we can do that. We didn't always have political action committees. We didn't always have super PACs in this country. That was something that happened later on. And I really believe that if we did not have corporate money tied to electoral politics, tied to these politicians, I really do believe that these politicians would feel more of a push to actually do what their constituents want them to do. But as long as the big money is in, these things will not change. There will be some type of push for reform when you have masses of people come out for protests like we have for this particular issue. And the protests are still happening, by the way. So keep that up. That is actually working. But they did pass a piece of legislation, and I do want to show you the votes here. It says the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So this is what I was telling you is dangerous, because Zionism isn't Judaism. You can be a Zionist and not be Jewish. Richie Torres is a Zionist. Richie Torres is not Jewish. There are Christian Zionists. So this is very dangerous that we have gotten to this point. 412 people voted yes. One person voted no, and that was Republican Congressman Thomas Massey. One voted present, and that was Rashida Tlaib. Now I have this question. After the speech that Rashida Tlaib gave on the House floor when she was asking them not to censure her, why in the hell would you vote present? Talk to me, folks. Somebody explain this to me. That does not make any sense whatsoever, because all the tears that you shed on the House floor, it doesn't mean anything anymore because you voted present. And this is why the squad's base has started to wither away, because they say one thing, but when it comes time to vote, they do the opposite. The World Socialist website called this out. Democratic Majority Leader Schumer libels anti-genocide student protesters as aiders and abettors of anti-Semitism. Now, for those of you who may not care about this war at all, if you care about free speech, you should care, because now they're going to make it so difficult, right? Because these protesters, I've been to these protests, they're calling for the end of the occupation, the end of oppression. These are the things they're calling for. They're not calling for, harm to Jewish people. I've actually been at these protests, unlike some of the people that are against them, and I've covered them on the ground as well. So one of the things that I will say is this is going to turn into a censorship free speech issue, because they can change the definition and the terms anytime they want to. They can do this about any issue, by the way. Don't just think that it's only happening in reference to Israel and Gaza. This can happen to any other issue which you may be on either side of. They can just come in and just make changes. Let's go on. We'll go down here. Democratic Majority Leader Charles Schumer delivered a 40-minute warmongering tirade accusing young people and workers protesting the genocide of Gaza as aiding and abetting anti-Semites. This is wild. This is wild, wild, wild. It goes on to say anti-Semites are taking advantage of the pro-Palestinian movement to espouse hatred and bigotry towards Jewish people. This is coming from Chuck Schumer. He said, "We see so many of our friends and fellow citizens, particularly young people who yearn for justice, unknowingly aiding and abetting their cause." After accusing students on college campuses and in high schools in the United States of being useful idiots for fascists and anti-Semites because they object to genocide, collective punishment, and ethnic cleansing directed towards the Palestinian people, Schumer lamented that following the armed incursion of Hamas on October 7th, some of our fellow citizens justified a brutal terrorist attack because of the actions of the Israeli government. Schumer neglected to mention the attacks by the far-right Netanyahu government against the Palestinian people prior to October 7th this year. He said nothing about the seizure of Palestinian lands by Zionist fascist settlers, military raids in occupied West Bank, or calls by Jewish supremacist legislators to subdue Palestinians in Gaza once and for all. Why hasn't he said anything about the congressman that said get rid of all of them? Why hasn't he said anything about the occupation of the Palestinian people in the West Bank? They're still being pulled out of their homes. Why is he only speaking about one side? Let's go on. We're going to fast forward To this part, Schumer was similarly silent on actions taken by the IDF since October 7th. Saturation bombing and ground attacks on hospitals, mosques, and schools that have killed an estimated 20,000 Palestinians, most children and women. According to the figures from Iraq Body Count, more Palestinian civilians have been killed in less than 2 months in Gaza than during every year of the American occupation of Iraq, except for 2006, 2007, and 2014. The killing of at least 57 journalists as of November 29th, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. This compares to 10 journalist fatalities recorded by the organization in the 21 months since the Russian incursion of Ukraine. Schumer's speech, billed as an address on anti-Semitism, was an incitement to more intense repression directed against anti-war protests on college campuses and in high schools. So here's something I want you guys to think about. He goes on to smear the students, but within the past 2 years, we have watched under a Democrat administration, we have watched them make excuses for funding Nazis in Ukraine. We have watched them make excuses for funding and supporting a far-right racist government under Netanyahu. This is happening under the Democratic Party. Most people would expect this to happen under Republican administration, but this is happening under the Biden administration. So for the people who continue to tell me we have to vote for the lesser of two evils, I want to remind you once again, there is no lesser of two evils, particularly not just with domestic policy, not just with the military industrial complex, but when it also comes to the human rights issue. We are now seeing that the Democratic Party also does not respect human rights. Now, the same people who criticized Donald Trump for the Muslim ban that he had, for criticized Donald Trump for saying that people lived in shithole countries, those same people are making excuses for the actions of Joe Biden because they're part of his party. We really need to think about these things. There is no lesser of two evils politically in this country. When you look at these two parties, they're both corporate, they both serve corporate masters, they both support the military industrial complex and put the American people last. They're both evil. I want to fast forward to the votes because I'll give credit to where credit's due for WSWS for this. Several Democratic Socialists of America members and self-declared progressive Democrats voted in favor of the measure, which equates the Jewish religion with the Zionist state. This includes AOC, Ilhan Omar, Greg Kassar. I'm not familiar with Greg. And Ayanna Pressley. Now, Ayanna Pressley is the weakest of, she's one of the ones that I really don't expect to do much. I lived in her district, so I'm not surprised to see her name here. But you see who voted for it. AOC for all the Baptist, preacher, rhetoric that she had on the House floor. Ilhan Omar for all the shouting that she did to try to protect Rashida Tlaib on the House floor. None of it matters at the end of the day, because when it comes time for them to vote, they show you who they are. It goes on to say Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian member of Congress who was censured earlier this month for initially failing to condemn the October 7th raid by Hamas and for using the phrase "from the river to the sea," could not summon the courage or principle to vote no, and instead voted present. Now, I'm curious to hear, how does Rashida Tlaib's constituents feel about this? And I ask that question because her district in particular has the largest Arab population in the United States. And the majority of them have said they do not plan to support Joe Biden in 2024. I wonder how they feel. Are they happy with the fact that Rashida Tlaib voted present? Going on. This is crazy. We're going to highlight this. The only representative to vote against House Resolution 888 was far-right Kentucky Republican Thomas Massey, who nevertheless said he agreed with the title and much of the language. Like, this is, you have someone who's a Republican voting against it. And the squad members can't even, Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian member, votes present. In his speech on Wednesday, Schumer attacked protesters for using the phrase colonizers to describe illegal Zionist settlers. He also attacked the phrases glory to the martyrs and from the river to the sea, falsely characterizing the latter as a violently anti-Semitic message and a racist dog whistle. You guys get this? Now they don't want you to use the term colonizers. See how far this is going? How will this affect the education system in this country? We talk about the history classes in school. What are they going to be? What are the teachers going to be able to cover and not be able to cover? What are we going to do? Are we going to stop calling the Europeans who colonized North America? We're not going to call them colonizers anymore. What are we going to call them? Tourists? Let's continue. Schumer went on to defend his appearance at the March for Israel pro-genocide rally held in D.C. earlier this month, saying that labeling it as a hate rally was anti-Semitic. You see what's happening here? Anything, this is very dangerous, because now it's going to get to the point where any type of criticism towards I said the state of Israel, not the people, the state of Israel, they're just going to push it off and say that's anti-Semitic. Imagine if every time something happened to Black people or towards the Black community, imagine if every time we said that's racist. It's not received as well. We don't have those protections. As I said before, we're always last. It goes on to say, speakers at the pro-Israel rally included Pastor John Hagee, a virulent anti-Semite who previously said Hitler was sent by God to drive the Jews into Palestine, and the fascist evangelical Christian Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. So you see what I mean? They have no problem. People like Chuck Schumer, he has no problem, hanging out with people who have this type of rhetoric when it fits his cause. But you can't march with people on the right in this country for Medicare for all. This is very problematic. And I want to show this again, and then we're going to get to some of the other speeches. The point that I made with this particular tweet is I said, Black people pay attention. This tweet right here, see how fast they moved? Black people pay attention. Look at how fast our government can move to protect other groups in this country. But when it comes to us, we're either not even included in the memo, or we're pushed to the bottom of the list, or we are told, as Joe Biden told civil rights leaders, now is not the time. I don't know how long people are going to continue to put up with this. I don't know what else to tell you, but you got to stop supporting these people. You got to stop supporting the Democratic Party. Don't go support the Republican Party, but you got to get out of this. You really do. Now, it's just interesting that they voted the way that they did, because before that legislation, they were actually speaking out in favor of the Palestinian struggle. Now, shout out to Chuck Modi, because he was able to capture these speeches. I have 3 to show you. There's Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, and Rashida Tlaib. Listen to what Jamal Bowman said.
We demand a permanent ceasefire. Now. And the reason is simple. We are against mass murder. We are against genocide. We are against ethnic cleansing. We are against the continued slaughter of civilians. We are against the mass murder of children. And we are for peace. We are for justice. We are for equality. We are for self-determination. We are for love. We are for human rights. And we are for our shared humanity. That's it. It's that simple. We have all read about genocides. We have all read about mass murders. I cannot believe I'm living through one. And I cannot believe I'm living through one, and the U.S. government is condoning it and being complicit.
But you were a part of the problem. See, this is the thing. But yes, I get what he's saying, but he's a part of the problem, because when it comes time for you to hold the line, you don't hold the line. This is a part of we have people in there that could have been holding the line all this time that they have been in Congress, but they choose not to. And Jamal Bowman, you really can't talk about humanity and human rights because you voted to support funding Nazis in Ukraine. So it's just for him to say he can't believe what our government is doing. You can believe it. You're a part of it. You're a part of the government. You're in the House. We're not in the House. You're the one voting on pieces of legislation. We don't get to vote on these. Could you imagine if they actually allowed the American people, us, to have direct democracy on the national level, and we get to vote whether or not funding goes to the state of Israel or funding goes to Ukraine? That would be a riot, right? Imagine if we had that direct democracy on a national level, not just on a local level. Even Rashida Tlaib gave a speech, but again, when it came time to vote, she voted president. So here's Rashida Tlaib.
Netanyahu continues to want to restart the genocidal bombing campaign with President Biden's support. We cannot look away, my friends. We cannot look away, America. We must ensure that everyone sees exactly what the extremist Netanyahu is doing to thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians, especially children, who are being starved in Gaza and pulled out of the rubble. The brutal reality of the occupation and apartheid has been exposed for all to see. We know that there is a concerted effort to silence those speaking up for peaceful coexistence and human rights of all people. We will not be silent. Fighting to save lives, no matter faith or ethnicity, should not be controversial, especially when the majority of Americans support a ceasefire. All the major human rights organizations support a ceasefire. The African National Congress, the party of anti-apartheid hero Nelson Mandela, supports a ceasefire. The Pope supports a ceasefire. This isn't controversial.
But she voted present. And last but not least, Cori Bush. Again, shout out to Chuck Modi for capturing all of these. And for those who also don't know, there's a hunger strike actually happening outside of the Capitol. And Chuck Modi has actually been capturing that as well in reference to this particular issue.
Effective ceasefire agreements protect civilians and enable humanitarian aid to get to the most vulnerable. It's what we need in order to stop the killing, full stop. But ceasefires are not only about stopping the bombing. A ceasefire will lay the foundation for those peace talks to proceed. It allows us to foster the conditions to tackle the root causes of the conflict. We must lift the siege on Gaza. We must end the military occupation, dismantle the apartheid system, and hold to account all those responsible for human rights abuses. Those of us calling for a ceasefire, we are in the global majority, as my sister just said. Leaders all over the world, and you just spoke it. Like our UN Secretary General called for a ceasefire. The Pope has called for a ceasefire. The UN and the majority of countries around the world, like you just said, Rep. Tlaib, have called for a ceasefire. Nearly every human rights group under the sun has called for a ceasefire. Over 40 members of the United States Congress have called for a ceasefire, which is a long way from the 13 that we started with. So don't stop. Keep up the pressure. Keep up the fight, because Palestinians deserve self-determination, deserve peace, deserve safety, deserve wholeness, deserve your humanity, deserve to live. And so we won't stop. So ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Tell your representatives, sign on to the resolution. Thank you.
But where were you when it came time to really speak up and vote? So we'll look at this picture here, and I'll get to your question. I see your question in the chat there, Ethan Gray. I'll answer that in just a second. So these were all the ones who were here. So you can see it says Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and actors Cynthia Nixon and Denis Benton. So that's the other thing too. There were also, that's Cynthia Nixon there. She was Miranda on Sex and the City. For those who are not aware, there's Denis Benton. So it wasn't just members of the squad. There were other people, but Cynthia and Denis are part of the hunger strike that's happening outside of the White House. So this was the event that they did speak at. Now, Ethan is asking a very good question about censure. One second. I just want to make sure I pull that up for you. Okay, we'll go ahead and pull that up because that is a good question. So Ethan is asking, is it the case that Rashida Tlaib voted president because she was censured by Congress? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Well, let's look at what it means to be censured. Just going to pull this up here. 1 second. Because I have shown this before, but I want to bring this up again. Okay, let's add this to the screen here. Oh, let me just pause this video. What does it mean if someone is censured? So let's pull this here. I think you guys can see. Is it big enough? Okay. So this goes back to when Rashida Tlaib was censured. A censure is a formal vote of deep disapproval of a member's conduct taken by either chamber of Congress. So how does it work in Congress? So let's see. A vote of censure is reserved for more serious violations. When the House approves a censure measure with the majority vote, the member being censured must stand in the well of the House as the presiding officer reads the censure resolution aloud. Yada, yada. What does it actually do? A vote to censure another member of Congress does not hold any other power beyond a public condemning of that member's behavior. It does not expel a member from Congress or deny the rights or privileges of that member within Congress. The Senate website says a censure can have a powerful psychological effect on the member and can subsequently threaten the relationships they have with their colleagues. The House website notes that a censure makes the House deep disapproval of a member publicly known, but does not warrant an expulsion. A censure alone would also not remove a member from their committee assignments, but stripping a member from their committees could be an additional punishment of that censure. So that's the thing. She still could have voted against it. Yes, she already has that deep disapproval, but my thing is you already have the deep disapproval there. If people already don't like you, they already don't like you. You just might as well just ride that boat. Just keep riding that wave. You know, I mean, no sense in trying to win people over in the House to your side now. They're already against you. Now, what was interesting about all of this, get a hold of this. For whatever reason, we live in a Twilight Zone episode because apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene actually voted against sending billions to Israel. This is different compared to what she said previously. A couple of weeks ago, she was on record saying that we need to do what we can to support Israel, but apparently something changed. And I shared this. MTG voted against sending $14 billion to Israel. We live in a Twilight Zone episode. So this actually came from her Facebook page. I voted no to sending $14 billion to Israel because I believe the U.S. needs to stay out of foreign conflicts and focus on our own massively horrible problems. And because I believe that the U.S. funding of Israel's war would open the door to the regime and its State Department trying to control how Israel fights its enemies, which would be the worst thing possible for Israel. The regime and its State Department would drag out that war and ultimately involve American military, eventually leading to a broader war in the Middle East and with Iran and likely more world powers. We live in a Twilight Zone episode. Like, we really do. And I'm not here to praise MTG, but it's just, notice how she's not getting tremendous backlash for voting against it. Notice how for voting against the billions to send to Israel, why aren't people coming after Marjorie Taylor Greene? Why aren't all the news pundits contacting and trying to interview and shouting down Marjorie Taylor Greene for voting against billions to help Israel? Pay attention, folks. Don't you guys find this to be a little bit strange? What about the liberal media? The ones who have criticized the far right in Congress and said they don't want them there. They don't want the former Trump people there. Why haven't they been dragging MTG's name in the mud like they've done Rashida Tlaib? Think about this, guys. Even the liberal networks like CNN and MSNBC, they've been harsher towards Rashida Tlaib and her position in reference to funding Israel, but they haven't said anything about Marjorie Taylor Greene voting against funding Israel. We have to pay very close attention to who sets the narrative and why that narrative is set. Very interesting. Let me go to some of the comments here. Lana says there's zero sense of urgency. Perry, who's a Sabby member, says Tlaib still harbors political ambitions and needs dim leadership to realize them. But at this point, like, if I was Rashida Tlaib, leave the Democratic Party and register as an independent. Kyrsten Sinema left the Democratic Party. You can leave the Democratic Party. You already have a base in your district. Your district overwhelmingly supports you. I'm sure they would still continue to back you even if you were an independent. I can understand if, like, she don't really have no, but she has a strong base. Thank you for the super chat, Perry. Schumer would have told the slaves not to rebel because you never know who could get hurt. Ouch. And thank you for the super chat, Raphael. The Congress lady should be proud of the censure. Sam Houston was impeached as the governor of Texas. History is very kind to him for his stand. And we have George Santos saying he's wearing his expulsion as a badge of honor. Maybe Rashida Tlaib should wear her censure as a badge of honor. I'll take the comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sab, it's the island of Long, not Staten. Island of Long? Oh, Long Island. Congressional District 3, the one right above mine. Like I said on Call In Friday, dim state lawmakers got caught with their hand in the cookie jar with the gerrymandering. Then upstate conservative judge appointed a special master to draw the legislative lines that caused Dems in the House to lose by a slim margin. Watch New York State 2024. Democrats' path to win the House is New York State. And thank you for this tip as well. I don't think it'll help them in a court of law, Sab, for the simple fact that if I'm speaking up for Palestinians and you try to say I'm being anti-Semitic and try to press charges, I can say, no, I'm being pro-Semitic, not anti, seeing that Palestinians are of Semite people themselves. I think they know this and that it will fail, but it is a tactic to slow down and take the steam out of the protests. I hear you, Roger. We're moving on to our next story. This one's pretty interesting. Before we get there, if you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. Thank you so much. It helps me with the algorithm. Kudos to the chat. In a interesting turn of events, the state of Florida has decided to cancel the Democrat primary for 2024. Just nixed it. Just nixed it. Florida is doing its own thing. Florida said we are not going to hold a Democrat primary. Now, what does that mean for the other candidates that are running in the Democrat race? What does that mean for Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and Cenk? We know Cenk has his own issue because he wasn't born in the United States, which he says that he is going to challenge via the Supreme Court. I do not think a conservative Supreme Court is going to grant Cenk this wish. They probably won't even entertain that piece of legislation or that form, because the Supreme Court gets so many cases presented to them on a weekly basis. I don't think they're going to consider that to be a priority, okay? There are more pressing issues that are sent to the Supreme Court. But get a load of this, because this is a doozy. Florida Democrats plan to cancel presidential primary, enraging Dean Phillips' campaign. Oh, Dean. Oh, you're so gullible, Dean. Let's go on here. Florida appears poised to hold no presidential primary election for Democrats this cycle after the state party submitted only President Joe Biden's name as a candidate up for nomination. The move to leave Representative Dean Phillips off the primary ballot left the Minnesota Democrat enraged on Thursday. In a statement first provided to Politico, Phillips, who has launched a primary shot against Joe Biden, accused the Florida Democratic Party officials of rigging the primary. Well, you don't say. They did this to Bernie Sanders in 2016. You know, it's just, we called this, he threatened a lawsuit and a convention fight if he didn't win ballot access in the state. He threatened a lawsuit and a convention fight. We had a lawsuit after 2016, the DNC fraud lawsuit. Some of you have been with me for a while. I interviewed the lawyers that actually started that lawsuit on the show a while back, right? The Becks. And it became very clear to me that at the end of the day, you're wasting your time with this. You're wasting your time with this lawsuit. Number one, that's going to cost money, right? I don't know how much money Dean has, but it does cost money. But one thing the Becks made it very clear to me is that after everything that they went through, and they weren't even trying to have anything overturned. They weren't trying to make it so that Bernie Sanders won. They just wanted to be able to get all of those individual, donors that donated to Bernie's campaign, those small dollar donations, a lot of working class people. They just wanted to be able to give those people their money back. Anyhow, the judge ruled in favor of the DNC. And what that judge was able to prove, thanks to attorney Bruce Spiva, well, not thank you, Bruce, but the DNC thanks him. The DNC attorney, Bruce Spiva, was able to prove that the Democratic Party, first of all, the DNC is a corporate thing. It's a corporation. So I'll pull up that statement in just a second from Bruce Spiva, but I just want to remind you of what happened when we tried to do this before with the lawsuit. Let's continue. Americans would expect to see the absence of democracy in Tehran, not Tallahassee, said Phillips. The intentional disenfranchisement of voters runs counter to everything for which our Democratic Party and country stand. Our mission as Democrats is to defeat authoritarians, not become them. This is another example of the Democratic Party also being fascist. The Phillips campaign complaint is rooted in the process by which candidates get on the ballot in Florida. Under state law, it is left up to the parties to decide who makes the primary ballot. The deadline for parties to submit a list of approved candidates to state election officials is Thursday, but Florida Democrats acted before then, sending a notice on November 1st to the state that Biden is the only primary candidate. Phillips had entered the race a few days earlier, and self-help guru Marianne Williamson had been campaigning for months by then. Under state law, if a party only signs off on one candidate for the primary ballot, the contest is not held. Florida's primary is held March 19th, which puts it in line behind Super Tuesday and several other large states as California and Texas. It is expected to allocate 250 delegates. Here's something to think about. What happens if other states decide to follow Florida's lead? What happens if the Democratic Party in other states decide we are only going to put forth Joe Biden as the primary candidate for the Democratic Party? What happens? We could be looking at a potential domino effect. This part's interesting here. In his statement, Phillips called the handling of the process by Florida Democrats a blatant act of electoral corruption and demanded Biden condemn and immediately address it. The Biden campaign did not comment for this story. Of course they did not. Of course they did not. This is Bernie Sanders 2016 all over again. Now, Cenk and Marianne Williamson actually did meet about this virtually, discussing this issue and what the next step forward will be. They actually had audience members ask questions too. So I thought that was pretty interesting, asking like, what is the process going forward? Now, they say that they intend to fight this. But again, I've seen this before. I have seen this before, and I just don't know. My recommendation to Marianne Williamson, Cenk and Dean Phillips is to leave the Democratic Party and to all run as independents. Cenk, I don't really know what's happening with you, because you weren't born here, so that is a thing. That is a real thing. But I've said this earlier on. I said that Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips should be running as independents, not through the Democratic Party. Let's get into this discussion that Cenk and Marianne had about what they plan to do going forward.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the press conference. My name is Carlos Cardona, and I'm the campaign manager for Marianne Williamson 2024 for president. And so with us today is Kara Eastman, the campaign manager for Cenk.
We're moving forward. We're just going to get to Cenk and Marianne. Here we go. Right about there.
In the state of Florida, they did several absurd things there at the Democratic Party. Let's talk about it, and then obviously we'll take questions. I'll go first, Marianne will go second, and then we'll take your questions. So they gave us no notice, any of the candidates, as to when they would be having a meeting to discuss which candidates could go on the ballot. And I want the press to understand, this is really important, we're in all of the other states. All three of the campaigns are working diligently on getting on the ballots everywhere. So we're aware of the rules of the different states. We're all trying very, very hard to abide by those rules. And I think we're doing a great job. We spend a lot of time and energy in all three of the campaigns trying to make sure that we know when the deadlines are, what the requirements are. There are often signature requirements, financial requirements, forms, etc. And it's basically our number one task, because it's one of the bigger challenges in this campaign. And so with all the other states up until now, there's been a relatively fair process. And now we could argue about whether we agree or disagree with the decisions that they've made in regards to who's on the ballot or not. And I would probably have the largest disagreements out of the three of us for sure on getting included or not included in some of the ballots. But this is not about that. And this is definitely not about my naturalized citizen issue. This is about all three of us being excluded in a way that was absurd, ridiculous, counterproductive, done obviously in secret, obviously to help the incumbent Joe Biden, and needs to be reversed. So
let's pause here for a second because I want to comment on something that he said about the deadlines. So Cenk said that we are aware of the deadlines in all the different states. That's great. However, the reality is it doesn't matter if you're aware of the deadlines in all the different states. They can change the rules just as like what Florida's doing now. Remember, they can change the rules. They are a corporation. They don't have to, we'll get into that in a second, but I just wanted to say that it doesn't matter if you knew when the deadlines were. They can change things.
We have sent in a letter saying that they should include our names in the list that they are giving to the Secretary of State today. We'll, of course, see how that plays out. And we give them every opportunity to do the right thing, and we'd be thrilled if they did the right thing. And we believe in democracy. We believe in letting the Democratic voters decide. And the number one problem with what the Florida Democratic Party is doing is not how it affects me, Marianne, and Dean. It's how it affects the Florida Democratic voters. They are robbing them of their voice. They're saying that democracy is not important, that you should not participate in the process. And we don't care what you think. We don't.
And this is where I say, if it were me, I'm not voting Democrat or Republican, so whatever it is, what it is. But if it were me and I were a Democrat in Florida, then I would try to rally as many Democrat voters that I know and push back on this. This is where I think the voters should actually get together and form some type of coalition and push back against the decision that has been made here. Guys, March is actually just around the corner. Can you believe it? Like, March is literally around the corner. We are already towards the end of 2023. So the primary will be here before you know it. And remember, there is no Democrat primary debate this time around. So this is going to be very, very different.
Don't care if you support the incumbent, don't support the incumbent, whether you want to do a vote for one of the other candidates that you find to be compelling, a candidate that is closer to your point of view, a candidate that you think has a better chance of winning, etc. We are just going to be authoritarian, and we're going to do this in the dark of night. And their excuses, of course, have been comical. And all three of us are perfectly aware of the rules in every other state, and we have asked repeatedly the state of Florida through our campaigns what the rules are here so that we could abide by them. They never returned our calls or our emails to any of the campaigns. And then the day before the deadline, they say, oh, by the way, we made this decision. Not only did we make this decision, we made it a month ago, but we never let any of you guys know.
It doesn't matter if you know what the rules are. It does not matter. They can change the rules. They can change. We'll go ahead and pull that up now, and I'll come back to that discussion. But I just want to show you again, because this cannot be said enough, right? And I know some of you have been with me for a long time. You're like, how many times is she going to show this on the show? But there are new viewers. But I have to continue to stress this as much as possible. This is what attorney Bruce Spiva said in order to actually give the DNC the win during the Bernie Sanders, that fraud lawsuit. This is what people need to understand about the DNC. Thank you, Theron, for sharing this. According to the DNC attorney, Bruce Spiva, there's no such thing as a Democrat. Let's get to it. DNC attorney Bruce Spiva, this is what he was able to argue in court. There is no such thing as a Democrat. The DNC just encourages people to vote for the Democratic Party. No one has a right to an expectation of a fair election. Let me say this again. No one has the right to an expectation of a fair election. Like, this is just plain and simple, folks. It goes on to say, if the DNC wishes to select a candidate in the primaries instead of a free election process, that is their right. Sounds like to me, the state of Florida, the Democrats in Florida have decided to select Joe Biden as their candidate for the primary. So they can do this. 3, donating money to Bernie Sanders doesn't mean you thought that money was going to assist him to win the primary. You have no right to think the DNC was obligated to follow their own charter and internal policies about elections. So they don't even have to follow their own charter. Can't be said enough, folks. And 4, discussion of and any disputes with the DNC do not belong in a transparent process in a court of law. Why is that piece important? Obviously, what Cenk is telling you, it appears that in reference to Florida, they tried not to be transparent with people like Marianne and Dean and Cenk, and of course, that was intentional. But according to what was ruled by the courts, and what Bruce was able to prove, they don't owe you transparency. Goes on to say, the DNC is a private association, which should never be asked to engage in the discovery process or have to reveal any of its internal workings or strategies should they decide to select a candidate rather than allow a fair election of a candidate. And that is exactly what Florida has decided to do. So they can go forward with a lawsuit if they want to. But like I said, we've been through this before. And my whole thing is they'll probably argue that same sentiment that I just read you there. Legally, apparently, they actually don't owe you any transparency, and they can select the candidate if they want to. This is why I said it is a waste of time running through the Democratic Party. Let's get back to the video.
Come on. There's no way in the world to interpret that in any way other than bad intent. But finally, from my point of view, and again, I'm super happy to take questions. Actually, there's 2 last things I'll say. One is if they don't do the thing that we're asking for, we, of course, then will have to take further actions. And one of the actions that we're definitively going to take is that we're going to do an implementation challenge, both for the Florida Democratic Party and the DNC, and try to get them to actually follow their own rules and bylaws, because we are correct. This Florida Democratic Party is incorrect in how they have applied these rules. And so that implementation challenge has succeeded before. It will likely succeed in this case as well if we have to go to it. And it's just flat out embarrassing for the Florida Democratic leadership that they need to be forced into following their own rules. And then finally, I don't understand the logic of what they've done here. I mean, they've bungled it so thoroughly. According to the Florida laws, if there's only one person on the ballot, there's no person on the ballot, and there is no election at all. Well, in that case, I don't know why anyone is assuming that Joe Biden would get those delegates. By definition, there's no election. No one won. There's no one on the ballot. So I hereby claim all of those delegates. Okay, now Marianne can also claim those delegates. And do you know how we would sort that out? We'd have an election. That's how we would sort it out. Okay. But if you're not going to hold an election, there's no way in the world Joe Biden has those delegates. That's not a thing where you say, oh, we didn't hold an election, but we have just picked the one person in the state of Florida, presumably Nikki Fried, has picked who the candidate is going to be. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works according to your own rules. That's not how it works according to the DNC. And that's not how it works in a democracy. And the Democratic Party should be the biggest advocate and champion of democracy, especially at a moment like this.
Why would the Democratic Party be the biggest, champion of democracy if it's bought by corporations? I mean, obviously, if you looked at exit polls from 2020, most of the Democratic voters actually did support something like Medicare for all, right? But most of them didn't vote for Bernie Sanders. So again, why would they don't actually want to give the people what we want. They don't want the people to actually win anything. This is the part that people really got to understand. This is a corporate party. And the difference is, I think the Republican Party, they don't say they're not corporate. They're not trying to say that they're not. But the Democratic Party likes to give people this illusion that they're not bought and paid for, and that they actually do care about working class people, and that they actually do care about the social justice issues. But again, like, they're bought.
When they say that the other side is challenging democracy at its core, and I believe that. That's why I'm in this race, because I think Trump would destroy democracy. But apparently Nikki Fried's going to beat him to the punch. So let's be honest about what's happening in the state of Florida. Authoritarianism, anti-democratic values, and not what the Democratic Party should stand for. Marianne.
Well, I certainly agree with everything that Cenk said. And I think that the Florida statute itself is unconstitutional, giving that kind of power to the party. The party itself is a political committee. It's not a government agency, but it's playing a quasi-governmental function here. And it has no right to block democracy this way.
I just want to go back to something that Marianne just said. Right about here. Let me just make sure.
Marianne.
Well, I certainly agree with everything that Cenk said. And I think that the Florida statute itself is unconstitutional, giving that kind of power to the party. The party itself is a political committee. It's not a government agency, but it's playing a quasi-governmental function here. And
that part right there. The party itself is not a political committee, or excuse me, a political committee, or it's not a government agency. The party itself it's a corporation, though, and corporations can change their rules. That's the thing. I mean, how many of you work, right? Like, if you ever work for a company has one set of rules, then next year they're like, oh, by the way, we're making some changes here, and there. I mean, come on. How many companies made changes to you're allowed to work from home during the pandemic, whereas before they said, no, you could not work from home. So the thing is, it is a corporation. This is not like an organization that you just join and have friends and hang out, and it's all about money.
It has no right to block democracy this way. It has a responsibility to the public good. And we all know that we're living at a time when our democracy itself is in crisis. We all know that the threats to democracy of them that are represented by people such as Donald Trump. But the irony here, of course, is that the Democratic Party claims to be trying to protect democracy, but their way of doing it is to suppress democracy.
But I don't think any people really believe that the Democratic Party is trying to protect democracy. They're trying to protect corporate interests. That's what the party is trying to do. So I think that when Marianne says, like, they have no right to do this, according to a former DNC attorney, Bruce Spiva, and a federal judge, they do have the right to do it. This is what I want people to fully grasp. According to the ruling from the judge, the DNC has every right to do what they're doing right now. Yes, I know this is not on the national level. This is in the state of Florida, but the Democratic Party in Florida can do what they want, and they know they can. That's why they did it. They know they can change the rules.
It's wrong, and it's also undercutting of the most basic rights. If we cannot assume that the people of the United States have fair and equal access to knowing even who their candidates are, then we don't have fair and equal access to the vote. And this is why this is a transgression of the 14th Amendment. And this is what we will be claiming in court if we have to.
But we already currently don't have fair and equal access to vote. And this has been an issue for quite a long time. If we had fair and equal access to vote, people wouldn't be fighting for voting rights laws, right? That's why people were still fighting for voting rights. That's the thing, is like, this has always been the case as long as I've been alive. It isn't fair. It isn't equal. Everybody doesn't have access to do it. I'd start with the most simple thing that the US government could do tomorrow. Make Election Day a federal holiday where everyone gets that day off so everyone can vote. We don't even have that. In some other countries, they actually do have that. Election Day is a holiday. So everybody can just go to the polls. So if they really wanted everyone that is of voting age to have access to voting, they would make Election Day a holiday. So this has always been an issue. It's never been fair and it's never been equal.
Both Dean, all of us, Dean and Cenk and myself, are going to take all legal action that we can and that we feel is necessary. We're going to communicate to the public, and we appreciate, I know all three of us appreciate that you are here. You know, you can't let these so-called little transgressions pass. We have to hold a line right here. This is not just about the fact that it's 200 and some odd delegates. It's not just the fact that it's drama going on within the Democratic Party. This is the chipping away of our democracy. And as Cenk pointed out, what an irony that the party called the Democratic Party, the party that claims to be the champion of democracy, has basically decided that Joe Biden will be the candidate. Now, this is authoritarianism, just as Cenk said. When I was a child, we were told that in the Soviet Union, people could vote, but they were told who their options were. And that's exactly what's happening here. And you have over 70% of Democratic voters who have made it clear time and time again that they want to hear other options. In this case, other options exist. And at this point, the Democratic Party, the state of Florida itself, have no right to manipulate the circumstances so in such a way that people are denied access to who their candidates are, and to hear from us and to know that we're about. Unfortunately, this is part of a larger concerted effort that the Democratic Party has been taking. This has to do with media suppression. It has to do with invisibilization, erasure, but it stops right here, or at least it will not go unchallenged right here by myself. And I think I hear the same kind of conviction in Cenk's voice. We certainly have heard it from Dean as well. And I'm with him 100%. And all of us will do what we feel we have to do. And I think that we're the ones who are standing up for democracy in this case, not the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it just sounds like a waste of time, money, and resources to me to even try to challenge this legally. Like, I get it, but at the same time, we've done this before. I think they all need to go back and look. And Cenk Uygur knows this because they covered this on TYT. They all need to go back and take a good look at that DNC fraud lawsuit. Why put people through this kind of thing again? You have a very short amount of time because March is, like I said, just around the corner. But the thing is just, this does not make any sense. The Democratic Party told you that they're not even going to let you debate, which I think there should be debates. I don't support the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but I think that if there are challengers, especially Marianne and Dean, they're both polling double digits. Not Cenk, but they're both polling double digits. So my whole thing is I think Joe Biden has challengers. There should be a debate. I feel like there should. So, but they won't let you debate. They're either like ignoring some of you on mainstream media. To be honest with you, the third party, get this, okay? The third party and independent candidates are receiving more press and media attention from mainstream media than the challengers in the Democratic Party. This shit is wild. Never thought this would happen, right? All the people who told me, no, the media is going to ignore third party and independent people. And I said, not if it's a big enough name. Turns out I was right. RFK Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein, they've been receiving a lot of attention from mainstream media. Jill Stein was on CNN. I don't remember CNN trying to bring her on before. So they're getting more of the media attention. So they are honestly, because they realize that they are the bigger threat. They realize that Marianne and Cenk and Dean are not, because the DNC already decided that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee. So they can just look over you guys.
Okay, we're happy to take questions here, and the reason that Carlos and Cara are on, and Cara Eastman's my campaign manager, and she was a Democratic candidate in Nebraska, nearly beat Don Bacon, and I'm awfully proud of that, and maybe one day again. Okay, but they're on because they were the people who corresponded with the Florida Democratic Party more so than we did. And so in case there's any details or questions that you want to ask about that, they might be able to answer them as well.
Hi.
So this question is important. I do want you guys to hear this one.
Isabella Murray with ABC here. Just wondering what the timeline would be as far as legal action goes, and if you've communicated with the Florida Democrats since you've all been making these statements.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the timeline is not great here. They were supposed to submit names to the Florida Secretary of State yesterday. And we asked them to submit our names in a letter that we sent them yesterday. Now, why did we send it yesterday? That's because they let us know the day before. And it's a very fair and good question that you guys should ask them. Hey, if this was meant with good intent, why did you keep it secret until the day before you're supposed to submit the names? And especially if you say you voted on October 29th, especially given that all three campaigns contacted the Florida Democratic Party repeatedly, probably a combination of dozens of times, and you didn't respond to them at all until the very last day. And then you told them, oh, by the way, we'd made this decision in the dark of night a month ago. So if no names were submitted to the Secretary of State and there is no election in Florida, which is likely the case at this point, I don't know how they would reverse it when it comes to the relationship between the Florida Democratic Party and the Florida Secretary of State. They have bungled this royally. But I do know that we're definitely going to, once that becomes confirmed, that we will do that implementation challenge through the DNC. But under no circumstances is Joe Biden getting those delegates. If there's no election, no one won. The idea that, well, we decided he won in our heads is not a thing.
I'm sorry, but they'll give it to Joe Biden. They can do that. This has already been decided in court that they can do it. I really do think it's a waste of time, energy, and resources for them to challenge this. But, each to their own, right? Each to their own. What a mess. Like I said, they all should have been running as independents in the first place. We will see what happens. This will be really interesting. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. If Rashida Tlaib leaves the Democratic Party, she should join the Michigan Green Party. That will be even more damaging to the Democrats. Interesting. Thank you, DC. The DNC is officially DNC Services Corporation. This is true. If you look up their address too, I think it says that on the address. Thank you for the super chat, Flower Bro. From the river to the sea, Biden gets no vote for me. Thank you, Justin. Been saying it since 2016. It's an absolute waste of time to think that candidates for the people can get through the Democratic Party primaries. Run green instead. And thank you for the super chat, Flower Bro. From the river to the sea, Biden gets no vote from me. Did I read that twice? Oh, there's two of them. Thank you. I don't know if you meant to send two, but thanks. Thank you, Cool Blue. When all is also said and done, Cenk Uygur and company will endorse Joe Biden and the Democrats during the period of the 2024 general election. Thank you. Yes. And thank you, DC. Voting doesn't matter when fascists count ballots. JB says if everyone had equal access to vote, ex-cons would be able to vote after serving their time. Boom. DC says, has the Williamson campaign team even met the criteria for ballot access in a single state? I believe they are on the ballot in New Hampshire. I believe they've completed that. And thank you for the super chat, Philip. With business law, they advertised there would be a process. Candidates spent cash based on advertised rules. Ads are a contract. DNC committed fraud. Yeah, but the judge said that they did not. I'll take the comment on Rockfin and we'll move on to our final story here about Matt Taibbi. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Can we get the X link for that Bruce Steva thread you read? Yes, I put that in the chat. It should be there. I can put it again. Also, speaking about corporations changing their policy all the time, I'm surprised you didn't use YouTube as a big example, LOL. I'm glad this is happening because more people will know about this because hardly anyone knows about the DNC for a lawsuit. So this will expose them more. That's very well said. Most people I talk to have never even heard about the DNC fraud lawsuit, to be honest. I will put that in the chat again. I think I still have it. Yeah. So I'm putting this in the chat again for those who DNC ruling Yeah, you should see my face pop up, DNC ruling. So that way you can have access to that. I can also pin it to the vid when I'm done. We're moving on to our last story. This one is about Matt Taibbi. So again, Matt Taibbi actually had another hearing in front of Congress, the Committee of Weaponization of the Federal Government. This time more so about social media, where there's certain things that they discuss here that I feel like was a little bit more in depth. I was actually kind of surprised they let them come back, because last time that Matt Taibbi was there, as many of you know, unfortunately, Delegate Plaskett, I always want to call her representative. She's not, she's a delegate. Delegate Plaskett sent Matt Taibbi a letter basically threatening to, basically send him to prison because of perjury, etc. After that interview with Mehdi Hassan. It's just been a mess. The IRS came to his house, etc. We've had Matt on the show. We've talked about this on the show, but they went back. And I think there's something that you need to hear this time around, because Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger are not letting this go. They are still, pushing and fighting for free speech. And I think people need to see what else they have discovered. There were other people on the panel, but we're going to focus on Michael and Matt. Let's get into
Schellenberger, let's start with Mr. Schellenberger. We'll work right down the line. So, Mr. Schellenberger, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting my testimony. 9 months ago, I testified and provided evidence to the subcommittee about the existence of a censorship industrial complex, a network of government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, government contractors, and big tech media platforms that conspired to censor ordinary Americans and elected officials alike for holding disfavored views. I regret to inform the subcommittee today that the scope, power, and law-breaking of the censorship industrial complex are even worse than we had realized back in March. 2 days ago, my colleagues and I published the first batch of internal files from the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, which show US and UK military contractors working in 2019 and 2020 to both censor and turn sophisticated psychological operations and disinformation tactics developed abroad against the American people. Many insist that all that we identified in the Twitter files, the Facebook files, and the CTI files were legal activities by social media platforms to take down content that violated the terms of service. Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and other big tech companies are privately owned, people point out, and free to censor content. And government officials are free to point out wrong information, they argue. But the First Amendment prohibits the government from abridging freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has ruled that the government may not induce, encourage, or promote private persons to accomplish what is constitutionally forbidden to accomplish. And there's now a large body of evidence proving that the government did precisely that. What's more, the whistleblower who delivered the CTIL files to us says that its leader, a quote-unquote former British intelligence analyst, was quote-unquote in the room at the Obama White House in 2017 when she received the instructions to create a counter-disinformation project to, quote, stop a repeat of 2016. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, CISA, has been the center of gravity for much of the censorship, with the National Science Foundation financing the development of censorship and disinformation tools, and other federal government agencies playing a supportive role. Emails from CISA's NGO and social media partners show that CISA created the Election Integrity Partnership, EIP, in 2020, which involved the Stanford Internet Observatory and other U.S. government contractors. EIP and its successor, the Virality Project, urged Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms to censor social media posts by ordinary citizens and elected officials alike. EIP reported that they had a 75% response rate from the platforms and that 35% of the URLs that they reported were either removed, labeled, or throttled or soft blocked. In 2020, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, violated the First Amendment and interfered in the election, while in 2021, CISA and the White House violated the First Amendment and undermined America's response to the COVID pandemic by demanding that Facebook and Twitter censor content that Facebook itself said was, quote unquote, often true, including about vaccine side effects.
Let me pause here for just a second. We're going to skip over a little bit because they get into like the jab stuff and YouTube doesn't like that. But one of the things I wanted to say is that the main point here that Michael Shellenberger is trying to get across is that according to the First Amendment, it is actually, against the First Amendment for the U.S. government to do what they did in reference to the Twitter files, to contact Twitter executives and ask them to suppress certain information, remove certain information, delete people from Twitter, remove their accounts, etc. According to the First Amendment, which we should actually sit down sometime and actually go through, he is saying that is against the First Amendment. So the government violated that. That is what he's here to basically prove versus when they were there last time. Let me fast forward just a little bit because he got into the jab stuff. So let's go here.
We choose and whose algorithms are transparent to all of us. I would encourage Congress to prohibit government officials from asking the platforms to remove content which the Supreme Court may or may not rule unconstitutional next year when it decides on the Missouri v. Biden case. Should the court somehow decide that the government requests for censorship are constitutional, then I would urge Congress to require such requests to be reported publicly, instantaneously, so that such censorship demands occur in plain sight. Thank you very much for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Shellenberger. Mr. Taibbi, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Make sure you got the mic on there.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan.
Hit the mic there if you could. Just hit the button there. There we go.
Right, sir. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the committee for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Exactly 1 year ago today, I had my first look at the documents that came to be known as the Twitter files. We've learned a lot since then. When Michael and I testified before the good people of this committee in March, we both talked about how this isn't a partisan issue at all, despite the fact that it's been repeatedly described as a right-wing conspiracy theory or a right-wing fantasy. We found evidence of suppression of movements on both sides, including leftist movements like the Yellow Vests, parties like the Green Party, organizations like Consortium Magazine.
I just wanted to pause there for a second because I wanted to make sure everyone heard that. They found suppression on both sides. Did you hear the organizations that he mentioned? The Yellow Vest, right? We all know the Yellow Vest organization from France, and the Green Party. So remember that, because now, Green Party, we're going into the presidential election. Jill Stein is running for president through the Green Party. So pay attention to things like that they were also suppressed.
Just this week, Michael and I reported on the group that he talked about, the CTI League, and in those documents we found evidence of monitoring groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, hashtags like Healthcare for All.
That part, that's a big one. Did you guys hear it? Hashtags. So that's another thing that they were suppressing. Healthcare for all, right? So think back to when we had the marches for Medicare for all, healthcare for all, those kind of things. They were actually suppressing that. Why would you suppress healthcare for all, right? That's not offensive, right? They don't want that to get across. Crazy stuff. Probably because they're paid. They got advertisers and sponsors that are part of big pharma.
The nature of censorship programs is that they tend to expand in all directions. And these programs already have. As someone who voted for Democrats his whole life and who got his ideas about speech issues from people like Senator Frank Church, Paul Wellstone, and Dennis Kucinich, I believe also that there's a less obvious but more important reason that people across the spectrum should care about this issue. And the former executive director of the ACLU, Ira Glasser, once explained to a group of students why he didn't support hate speech codes on campuses. The problem, he said, wasn't the speech. The problem was, quote, who gets to decide what's hateful? Who gets to decide what to ban? Because, quote, most of the time, it ain't you. The story that came out in the Twitter files, and for which more evidence surfaced in both the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit and this committee's Facebook files releases and in the CTI League documents, they all speak directly to Ira Glasser's concerns. There's been a dramatic shift in attitudes about speech in this country, and many politicians now clearly believe the bulk of Americans can't be trusted to digest information on their own. This mindset imagines that if we see one clip from RT, we'll stop being patriots, that once exposed to hate speech, we'll become bigots ourselves automatically, that if we read even one Donald Trump tweet, we'll become insurrectionists. Having come to this conclusion, the government agencies like the DHS and the FBI and the quasi-private agencies who do anti-disinformation work have taken upon themselves the paternalistic responsibility to sort out for us what is and is not safe. While they see great danger in allowing others to read controversial material, it's taken for granted that they themselves will be immune to the dangers of speech. This leads to the one inescapable question about these new anti-disinformation programs that is never discussed but needs to be. Who does this work? Stanford's Election Integrity Project helpfully made a graphic showing the quote-unquote external stakeholders involved in their content review operation. It showed 4 columns: government, civil society, platforms, and media. There's one group that's conspicuously absent from that list: people, ordinary people. Whether America continues the informal sub-rosa censorship system we've seen in the Twitter files or the Facebook files, or whether it formally adopts something like Europe's draconian New Digital Services Act, it's already abundantly clear who won't be involved in this kind of work. There'll be no dock workers doing content flagging, no poor people from inner city neighborhoods, no single moms pulling multiple waitressing jobs, no immigrant store owners or Uber drivers. These programs will always feature a tiny, rarefied sliver of affluent professional class Americans censoring a huge and ever-expanding pool of everyone else.
Now here comes the class issue. So this point that Matt just made here, who was actually making the decisions to decide what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what should be suppressed, what shouldn't be suppressed? It's affluent people and organizations. It's not working class people. We have no say in what is decided is censored or not. Again, it goes back to the ruling class. The ruling class is the one who is controlling all of this. They're the ones that call for censorship. They're the ones that say it's okay to say one thing, but it's not okay to say another. Now, let's fast forward and let's think about what's happening with Israel and Gaza. Who's making the decisions about what you can and cannot say in reference to that particular conflict? It's not working class people. It's the ruling class elite. It's the oligarchs. And this is what I continue to try to tell people. We don't really make decisions. We may make some decisions here in our personal lives, but when it comes to a grand scheme of things, we don't make decisions. We can't even vote in our country to decide whether or not we want to send money to another country abroad. We don't get to participate in those votes. We have representatives there in DC that are supposed to represent us, but they don't because they're bought. We make no decisions on the grand scheme of things. We're just here as little puppets, and the ruling class makes all the decisions, even when it comes to censorship. So I'm very happy that he brought in the class issue about the censorship complex.
Take away the highfalutin talk about countering hate and reducing harm, and anti-disinformation is just a bluntly elitist gatekeeping exercise. If you prefer to think in progressive terms, it's class war. If one small demographic over here has broad control over the whole speech landscape, and a great big one over there has no control whatsoever, it follows that one of those groups will end up with more political power than the other. Which one is the winner? To paraphrase our Glasser, it probably ain't yours. It isn't just one side or the other that will lose if these programs are allowed to continue. It's pretty much everyone, which is why these programs must be defunded before it's too late. Thank you very much.
So very well said there from Matt. I have another piece that I want to go to in this discussion, so I've time-stamped these. I want to bring in this gentleman here when he talks about some of the worst things that they found.
Two of you have been here before, and I think it's important to ask. You mentioned some of the current activities as you continue to monitor it, and you particularly mentioned the protest and the activities related to Israel's attempt to get back its hostages. Can you elaborate on some of the specifics that you think you see here in the way of either suppression or amplification? Is there any evidence that we're continuing to see, if you will, a bias that social media doesn't have a problem reporting one side, but does have a problem reporting the other side? I know it's a tough question.
Yeah. I mean, we've certainly, I mean, I think we've all seen calls for, I mean, I think to Matt's point that this is not a partisan issue, that we should all, that the test of your commitment to free speech is that you would like to see the speech that you really despise protected and that you would defend it. And I think we've seen calls for censoring pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas speech and have been disturbed by that. And Rupa has described that. And we've also seen calls for censorship of the other side. We've seen misinformation spread on all sides. So I think that what you're hearing from us is a general call that everybody needs to just calm down and remember that this country's greatness is really founded on that protection for that kind of, that protection of speech that we all might consider to be hateful. I always remind people that, you know, some of the most important court decisions by the Supreme Court were protecting the speech of neo-Nazis in the Brandenburg decision, in the decision in Skokie. If we can tolerate neo-Nazis marching through neighborhoods of Holocaust survivors, certainly I think we're capable of tolerating people defending violent attacks.
And that brings us.
Let me just bring up something really quick there in reference to what he just said. So we've known for quite some time that Palestinian voices were being suppressed on Twitter, right? So if you're a Palestinian leftist, you're going to experience even more suppression. But the Twitter files confirmed it. That was the thing. So the Twitter files gave us more concrete evidence for things that we thought was happening, but we didn't really have something that we could just nail it on and say, hey, this is proof that they're suppressing certain people. There is a Palestinian account on Twitter right now that for whatever reason, whenever you follow that account, Twitter unfollows you from the account. Multiple people have posted it on Twitter and they said, why do they keep on following me from this Palestinian account? So there was already suppression in reference to Palestinian accounts before October 7th, mind you. But the part there that he said about neo-Nazis marching through neighborhoods, I just want people to know something because I don't think people experience this everywhere, but I've lived in different places and I've lived in the South. Okay, I'm in Massachusetts now, but I've lived in the South. When I lived in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, there were Klan rallies. These things still happen. I still remember the neo-Nazis marching through downtown Columbia, South Carolina, when I was a senior in college. This still happens. A lot of people don't realize that. If you haven't seen it, it's not happening through your town or where you live, these kind of things, but it's a little bit more overt in the South, right? Racism is more overt down there than it is in the Northeast. Here, it's a little bit more covert, but shit still happens. But the thing is, those things still happen here in the United States today. And that goes back to that right to protest, assembly, and rally. So this is why I was saying when they were calling for an end to the pro-Palestinian marches, I'm like, I haven't seen anybody call for an end to the neo-Nazi marches that happen throughout this country every year. So that's something to think about. Let's continue here. I think he's going to ask Matt
To a
next
question, as we bring you back here and some new witnesses, do we have a challenge in America that we're constantly looking at what should be censored rather than how do we get more free speech so that the counter opinions are heard as loudly as those who yell and are heard the first time?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I think it's important to remember that the First Amendment not only guarantees people the right to speak and voice their opinions, but it also guarantees the right of all of us to hear those opinions. That's a crucial element of the promise.
So that goes to a follow-up. If that's the case, your suggestion about a instantaneous and transparent unveiling of any and all reduction, throttling, et cetera. Let's assume for a moment it's technically possible, quickly, it's certainly possible, but let's just say it was technically possible quickly. We're a legislative body. Do you believe it's appropriate for us in a Transparency Act to mandate that this happen so that we no longer have the kind of things that happened to the chairman, where he simply was systematically throttled so that he wasn't censored, he simply wasn't heard very loudly? If we had had that, do you believe that it would have changed the outcome, and should Congress look at mandating it?
I can say something about that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I strongly support transparency. You know, if you require, for example, that government officials or people supported by the government, such as this EIP or VP group, and by the way, just to give you some quotes.
Well, you mean what the ranking member described as legitimate, suggestions, and it was independent.
Right.
Isn't that always the defense, though, is that we didn't make the decision and the other guy didn't make the decision, it just happened?
Right.
I'm down to just a few seconds, and I do want to thank our Canadian for pointing out that we are about one step away from defunding here in the United States bank accounts. This administration has returned, so you understand, in the United States to making sure that people selling products or involved in activities that they don't want fail to have access. And that is another form of censorship that, I'm sorry it's gone so far in Canada, but trust me, it's underway in this country. Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Okay, that's the point there that he brings up about the financial punishment, where they actually, Justin Trudeau did do that seize the bank accounts of the truckers that were protesting. That also is another form of censorship. And then I want to get to this piece here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just absolutely fascinating to me how the folks on the left side of this dais are calling these things conspiracy theories, when just through the Missouri v. Biden case, there is a treasure trove of actual evidence in a court proceeding, witness testimony, factual evidence that shows that all of this has been happening under the Biden administration, and that there is true censorship from this White House into the American people. Mr. Schellenberger, I want to start with you.
That's something I just want to add to as well, guys. We need to remember when people mention the lesser of two evils, again, like I said, evil is evil. Let's all remember all these things that they're pointing out. This is not to say censorship wasn't happening before, but it was definitely worse under Joe Biden's administration. So that's something to keep in mind. This happened under a Democrat president.
On November 2nd, 2023, you posted an article on your Substack entitled "FBI and DHS Directors Mislead Congress About Censorship." In the post, you detail Senator Paul's recent questioning of DHS Secretary Mayorkas and FBI Director Wray regarding their respective departments' censorship activities. Notably, Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray both testified that their agency personnel complied with the law and did not violate First Amendment rights by targeting constitutionally protected speech on social media platforms. Given what we have learned in recent months from the Missouri v. Biden case and your investigative reporting shining the light on the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, is it fair to say that Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray lied to Congress when they told Senator Paul that their agency personnel did not target constitutionally protected speech?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that they misled Congress. I can't be sure of their intention, but they're wrong that those agencies weren't involved in demanding censorship by the social media platforms.
And just briefly, like how were they involved in censoring speech? Well, I don't want to read your whole article, just...
Oh, sure. I mean, FBI agents were directly flagging content to Twitter saying this appears to violate your terms of service. What about this? What about that? Same thing with DHS staff. And then, of course, DHS created the Election Integrity Partnership, which then became the Virality Project, which was in the process of demanding mass censorship of Americans.
And based on them reaching out, a lot of these social media companies then acted on that, like the Hunter Biden laptop, all these different activities, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember the context is that this was at a time when the social media companies were being threatened to lose their ability to operate, which is the Section 230. One of the most dramatic instances, which is in the Facebook files, is where the White House is demanding that Facebook censor content that they think could lead to people becoming hesitant to take the vaccine. Facebook responded and said that they were removing often true content of vaccine side effects.
Okay, we're going to skip forward just a little bit there because they get to the jab stuff. And then we'll get to the map part here. I have to say, out of all of the social media platforms, Facebook is the worst with the censorship from what I've seen so far. That one is a doozy.
Many federal officials to adhere to their oath they took to uphold and defend the Constitution, and it's up to Congress to ensure our First Amendment rights are protected. And the remaining time I have, Mr. Taibbi, if you could just comment on what you weren't able to respond to from Mrs. Wasserman Schultz.
Yes, well, first of all, just for the record, I've said on many occasions that I'm not a free speech absolutist. In fact, no journalist is or can be. We all operate under very serious restrictions involving libel, defamation, incitement. We have to navigate each one of those rules every time we publish anything. And then we always look fondly on that process because we believe those rules protect us. So we're not free speech absolutists. We're just not in favor of government censorship. That's the issue here. There's a profound difference between litigating something like libel or defamation and having an unelected, unaccountable, unseen committee remove your content without any due process. That's what we're talking about.
So to show you what he's responding to, because I think I skipped over Debbie. Let me try to go back to, we'll bring her back in. I thought I had, let me see. There she is. So we're going to bring in Top Ramen. That's what I call Debbie because Debbie got the Top Ramen hair coming on. We're going to bring her in. She was, of course, as you can imagine, was that Thunder? She was not nice to Matt. There we go.
Part of your humanity, and it demonstrates how hatred can drive humans to do unspeakable things to one another. And nowhere is hatred more evident than on social media. Since the October 7th attack, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate speech has exploded online. In just 1 month after the attack, the hashtag Hitler was right appeared in over 46,000 posts. But the rhetoric isn't limited to hate speech and death threats. Jewish conspiracy theories and disinformation continually find safe harbor on social media platforms. Even the racist and anti-Semitic Great Replacement theory was recently amplified on Twitter/X by none other than its owner, Elon Musk, and the right-wing darling, Tucker Carlson. Terrorists use the platforms to terrorize target populations, and Hamas even used the personal accounts of hostages and victims to live stream their brutality to incite further violence. Mr. Taibbi, yes or no? Should social media companies allow rape and murder to be live streamed by terrorists on their platforms in order to create fear and incite violence?
Notice they always use those two examples, right?
I believe that would violate their terms of service, would it not?
So your answer is no, it should not do, they should not be allowed to do that.
So she's such a bitch. I'm sorry, I really can't stand this woman. But the point when Matt said there that that would be against their terms of service, the point is that you can't do that on those platforms anyway, because it goes against the Twitter terms of agreement. Same thing with Facebook, same thing with TikTok. All those platforms, they have certain things that you cannot do. That's a part of the terms of agreement. Otherwise, your content will be removed. Your account will be deleted. So it's just, it's true. It's like, it really doesn't matter what Matt believes or not. It's what are the rules of that platform. So Twitter isn't going to allow you to show those things anyway.
Live stream rape and murder? No,
Right.
I think that would count as speech that would be prohibited under their terms of service.
Good. You do have absolutist policies, but
I do not have absolute. I do not have.
Please don't interrupt me. You have absolute. I've asked your question. You answered it. You do have absolutist policies. At least they have some limits. But I think a Homeland Security official.
If you have absolutist policies, you wouldn't have any limits. So you see that? You see what she just did there?
With respect, Congresswoman, all journalists operate
reclaiming
under
my time.
limits.
If a Homeland Security official echoed your opinion, you would call it censorship. But I'm glad that at least you acknowledge that rape and murder should not be allowed on social media platforms. Ms. Troy, I have the same question. Yes or no? Should social media companies take down brutal images of rape and murder live streamed by Hamas or similar groups like ISIS?
Notice she changed the question. See, I just wanted to say something here. When she asked Matt that question, she said, should it be allowed on the platform? But when she said, same question to this young woman here, she said, should they take down those posts? So the question isn't really the same. Pay close attention to that.
I agree with Mr.
No, Ms. Troy.
Oh,
Ms. Troy.
Ms. Troy. You were looking at me, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I believe they should follow their internal policies and they should absolutely not leave content up like that. And I can tell you as someone who worked on the Christ.
Okay, you hear this? Okay. Notice how she let her speak. Notice that she said they should follow their internal policies. Wasn't that the same thing that Matt Taibbi was saying? But she didn't let him finish. She's letting her finish. That's because this woman here is, if you heard her earlier speech in this conference, this woman here is basically, she was trying to warn people about the dangers of Donald Trump being reelected. So this is someone who's on the Democrat Party side. Whereas Matt and Mike were trying to tell people this should not be a partisan issue. Censorship affects everybody, regardless a part of what party that you are, right? So just notice how they play favoritism towards certain people. She basically said the same thing that Matt Taibbi did, but Top Ramen's going to top. And then I think she went to, yeah. So that was what he was responding to in reference to Debbie Weiserman Schultz. Someone asked me before what brand or what flavor of Top Ramen. Because she's wearing the pink jacket, I'm going to go with the shrimp Top Ramen. We'll go ahead and call it that there. But yes, so Matt Taibbi was there yet again. And I think that, who knows where this is going to go from here. But the fact that he was brought back there again, it tells me maybe there could be some type of push here in reference to the government intervening in social media. Hopefully it's a push in the right direction, because I don't want the government telling us what we can or can't say on social media either. So there's that. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. They suppressed the Green Party because despite what they say, the Green Party is a threat to the duopoly and they know it. And thank you for the super chat, Flower Bro. Israel has asked Meta and TikTok to remove over 8,000 posts about their occupation and genocide in Gaza. Over 95% of them have been removed. Israel has people in Congress working to ban social media to cover up their war crimes. Does not surprise me. I'll take that comment on Rockfin and then we will head out, guys. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. It is not enough that registered independent voters outnumber everyone else in the state, but they have to apply for positions in the government that deal with being in charge of voting in election counting. That's a good point. Thank you for this tip, Lois. Sabby, don't forget about one of the worst insults coming out of the so-called Democratic Party, super delegates. That is right. That is right, Lois. The super Ds. All right, guys, that is it for today. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. I am off on Monday. I'll be back Tuesday evening. Other than that, have a good night. Keep up the fight.